Okay, the bridge open?
No.
No, the lane's closed. Good morning, this is the, thank you for joining. Did you get, that's the only one? Yep. You wanna run over here and get it? I was waving at you several times in several ways and you're all
Oh,
locked
you're
in.
kidding.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Just
I'm
there
not
towards
kidding.
the end.
Yeah.
Good morning, so this is the June 30th, right? Meeting of the Good Neighbor Committee, so good morning, good neighbors, and welcome. We are have I think primarily today we're gonna focus on the disorderly property ordinance draft back that we got from the attorney's office. I want to thank staff for forwarding that along with our thoughts and comments, and we'll have a chance, and I apologize for not sharing this earlier. It's that's poor committee chairpersonship by both Rob and I. We had this a few days ago from staff before the weekend. And didn't give the green light to share it around, so I do apologize for that, but we'll walk through it pretty detailed today. I would point out for those who are attending, and Clint DeShan, who's attending virtually. Casey Turman is with us today. He's a Bangor Daily reporter. He's covering our community as part of his beat. So Casey will be here today, and of course, this is a public meeting, so everything and anything is on the record, and we certainly welcome that. Our meetings, our prior meetings are all on YouTube. We're doing this transparently anyway, but just to share that with folks. Clint, do you have anything for us before we kind of jump into the disorderly property? That a hard copy that's been shared with everybody who's here.
No, I think I'm all good. I think you can jump right in, and
okay.
Any questions on it, I'll let you know what we were thinking when they came up with it.
Okay, well, let's go through it then. Kind of together. This is, this has been something we've had for homework in the past. We talked about it. We spent the better part of a meeting talking about it in detail. And these are changes that have come back to us from the attorney Bernstein Sure, is that correct? Yep. So let's look through it and see what we have. Under the definitions of disorderly properties, we're adding disorderly activities, we're adding the term blocking or obstructing any town road by people or vehicles as a disorderly activity. That feel consistent and fair with what we've talked about in the past? Everyone okay with that? We didn't get into the number of cars or anything like that, just we have added excessive loud or unnecessary noise as deemed unacceptable by an officer at the property line. That feel like something that is a disorderly activity. And serving alcohol to minors. Anybody concerned with that as an addition to what would be considered a disorderly activity? Yep. And of the stuff that's still in here, we still think the other sub-paragraphs or sub-items are appropriately disorderly in terms of activities.
May I ask a question?
Sure you can.
Because I wasn't here for some of this stuff. Why just serving alcohol to minors and not serving or providing a place for minors to consume?
I don't think we dove into it that level of detail, but that's certainly something.
Because I mean, there's a lot of BYOB parties that happen.
Oh,
So
that's right.
then if you're just providing the place, but not providing the alcohol, I just think that makes a difference.
Yep. Yeah. Good. We'd argue that I didn't provide it.
Right, exactly. They all brought their own and my camera shows that.
That is a good note. Clint, do you get that note? Okay. 30. Excellent note. Yeah, anything else in here? So serving, what is, Lori, can you just, for my purposes, and I'll go back and watch it again, but can you just repeat that again?
Sure, providing a place for minors to consume.
Are you thinking add that to what it says?
Well, I
Serving
mean,
alcohol to minors or providing a place for them to consume.
yeah,
And, yeah. Or.
and or, yeah,
You know,
I would say both, yeah, should be in there.
To consume alcohol. All right,
We typically would say allowed to possess or consume. Cause if you're
Minus.
allowed to serve, you know, like serving, allowing and possessing, you can cover all those bases.
yeah, I think those are bases we should cover.
Serving,
Yeah.
serving, possessing and consuming are like the three things for us that we would normally say.
Serving,
Serving, possessing and consuming. If we were gonna talk about that, Lori was right that if it's a BYOB party, but if you're just carrying the case of beer on the property, that's different than consuming it. They're like, I'm just holding it for my friend. Well, let's close the loops.
Okay.
Friends not allowed to give
Shane,
beer.
yeah.
I don't know if you want to, did you consider other substances at all?
we didn't talk, I don't think we talked about other substances, but
That's necessary, but they're usually smoking pot, but I don't know.
You can be 18 and do that.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, true.
okay. All right. Let's press ahead. So. I think the remainder of the definitions were. Yeah, let's talk through what we have in the red line and come back and talk through maybe conceptually what we think we may have or may have missed at a higher level. Disorderly activity and disorderly property prohibited. So it's now gonna read, it's proposed to read, section 2055, disorderly activity and disorderly property prohibited. So that's adding activity to. You know, it strikes me that the ordinance used to be all about driving someone onto the, you know. Driving someone to the disorderly property designation, and that's kind of where everything kicked in. This feels like we're working more towards. Both the activity and the designation, and I think maybe that's something we should talk about when we get to the end of this, but let's go through this piece. No owner or residential property shall maintain or allow to be maintained or to exist on the owner's property a disorderly activity or a disorderly property as those terms are defined in this article. Each and every day that a disorderly activity is permitted to occur on the property after it becomes classified by the chief of police shall constitute a separate offense. How do people feel about that?
It's the owner's recourse. I'm just curious, like. As far as enforcement. I don't know what an owner can, he can't go in and. Police.
Yeah, we have some hold harmless language in here that, right, in terms of once a owner is. And where does that's somewhere in here, right? Once an owner is, if an owner is involved in an eviction process. Or is taking steps and you can't control what people are doing during that, I think that addresses that, but where is it?
Well, Dan, there's also the language in here is premised on the fact that if there's a repeat violation, the owner's gonna have to have a remediation plan. And the remediation plan can specifically call that out. We can put it in ordinance, or we could just understand that the remediation plan, and maybe that's the easiest way to do it. As soon as a remediation plan is in place, you know, future and subsequent violations by the tenant shall be suspended.
Yeah, it says, if the owner enters into a remediation agreement acceptable to the police chief may delay commencement of an enforcement action if, in the opinion of the police chief, the owner is making a good faith effort to implement the remediation agreement and no new disorderly activity occurs on the property. But isn't there something about when someone's in an eviction process in here?
I combed through it and I didn't see it. That came up as a question, I think, from Rob. And I just, no, I did not see that.
Yeah, I would like to think that we're not gonna hold a landlord who's in a remediation process or actively trying to disengage from their property, someone who's acting disorderly, it's, if the owner's doing something actively to address the problem, but has to operate within the law in terms of, eviction and things like that, it doesn't feel right to me that, Dennis, we're gonna keep finding Dennis for people he's trying to remove, who he just hasn't been able to remove yet because the court process is what the court process is.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Is that,
That's.
yes, to you?
That's.
Yeah.
what I'm asking.
So let's think about how we define that in here somewhere so that we're not.
I think we'll just add a clause that once if an owner shows us an eviction notice on a disorderly property, we'll suspend future violations against the owner and only have them against the tenant.
Yeah,
Because that shows a good faith effort.
Absolutely.
to-
Is that something that would go at the end, or would that go right after the declaration of a public nuisance, and then would that go right before this, Clint?
I think,
Or sort of doesn't matter, I guess, as long as it's in there, but
yeah,
this kind of sets it up a little more like, okay, working with it. The rest of this stuff doesn't really apply if they're working, trying to remediate
Yeah.
the situation.
yeah, we'll find a good place. I mean, this is where I would like to get, work with the attorney and just see where they think it makes the most sense. I don't think it'll be up in definitions. It's probably somewhere in the remediation process that it's an extra bullet within 20-58. Yeah.
okay,
There is a comment in section 20-58 on the 5, it talks about the owner entering mediation agreement.
Which one?
2058-5.
Yeah,
and that could be if the owner enters into a remediation agreement acceptable to the police chief. But it says no new disorderly activity occurs on the property. So, if you're in remediation,
it could get worse.
it could get worse and under a
It's not
strict,
eviction proceedings, I
Yeah.
can see it getting worse.
yeah, so that, maybe that's where it goes, but somewhere in here, we gotta hold a landlord harmless who is, unable to evict, who's working through an eviction process. But it takes several weeks, right? Could be 60 days to do, depending on how you hit the court dates and stuff like that, to do an eviction, right? Dennis, what's the fastest you can, is it 60 days? Like, if you think, can you do it less than that, or?
You do well in 90, especially in this court system.
Yep.
And that's the key, how court systems go. And we get kicked to the bottom. He gets preferential treatment over us.
Come to the top. I don't know what's ahead of us.
So we still, oh, Dan, if you're still discussing the locate, I mean, I understand. I mean, 20-58-3, paragraph 3, if we add a section A that just says at the time of the meeting, if they present proof of a eviction, the town will
Yeah.
suspend any future violations against the landlord.
All right,
Well, I mean, is eviction the only plan though?
I guess I would contend the only thing that you can do to prevent us from giving you future violations on your property as a landlord is show us proof of eviction. Why else would we want to let the landlord not be fined for having a disorderly property? Give me an example.
yeah, I agree.
I mean, I don't, this all thing talks about corrective action, so I didn't know that is the only, I've never seen one, never dealt with one. But if the only corrective action is that you have to start eviction, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, if his corrective action plan leads to another citation, I think we fine them again. And it makes it clear you're going to keep getting fined for a disorderly property or activity at your premise. And if the only thing that stops the fines from occurring, if you can't get your tenants to comply, then you're going to need to evict your tenant. I don't know what other, I just think we're going to get ourselves into a situation where the residents will be mad about the disorderly activity and we haven't, we can't even give them a fine anymore because we said, oh, it's a good remediation plan. So we'll suspend your fines. I think we gotta keep the fallback is that the ultimate authority to fix anything that's going very wrong in a rental is the tenant landlord relationship. We can't insert ourselves into it. We can only make it clear the power's with you, landlord, to evict a tenant if you don't like these fines.
Right, just so I'm understanding though, so there's a disorderly property in the. We assume that the course of action is you evict those students, you evict those tenants, sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think there's.
So then if we agree, if the landlord meets and says, okay, I've spoken to them, they're gonna straighten out and then so we all agree, yep, we got to sign something. And then they don't. And that to me, the landlord is working and trying to work with the tenant. That's the point. If we put eviction versus, I think, working with them, I mean, I didn't think that the first pass was, okay, you hadn't disordered the property, go evict those people.
I don't
This
think
sort
it
of-
is that, but I think what we are saying is that ultimately we do not want to have a relationship with the tenant. I mean, we don't. The town does not want to be the legal relationship is that a landlord owns a parcel of land in the town. He rents it to someone else. The relationships between the landlord and the tenant. We want to make sure that we stay in that role. And again, if the landlord's working with us and trying their best, I think that's great. But we're not saying you have to immediately evict. But if you're working with us and they promise, I'm going to be a better tenant, and they don't, we find them both. We can always waive. I mean, remember, this ordinance says that we can get rid of these at any time. You know, they can be lifted, the fine. So again, once the eviction's done, we go back to the landlord and say, thank you for getting it completed. We know you had a second violation. We're going to waive that penalty. I think we got to leave this to being, rather than addressing every case and instance, it's got to be in a situation where it's building a relationship between the town and the landlord. And I mean, we're not going to be overly strict, but if we don't have the ability to keep giving fines, this could just be a never-ending process of whatever. I'm trying, I'm going to remediate, I'll do better. Here's more teeth, here's more teeth. I think we've got to really hone in on the relationship of the towns with the landlord, and as long as we can find them, we've got a relationship. We're not going to overdo it, but you got to trust the relationship and the management and the chief to work with the landlord.
And hopefully this would be an incentive for landlords to work clearly with their tenants. I mean, it's not I'm not interpreting this as, one time and you're out, you've got to evict your tenant. It's, but maybe that should be clarified. It's like, how many go-rounds do we have?
And there'll have to be some judgment between the landlord, and, conversations with the tenant. Like, this is still, we have this remediation plan and we're working with the town, but we're still subject to these fines. You could stay here. We're not gonna evict you based on what's happened so far, but we're still subject to these fines. And if more fines come about because of it disorderly activity, we're gonna have to proceed with an eviction if we can't execute this as we agreed to. And I think that hopefully is I don't want to see anybody who makes a mistake on a Thursday night lose their house, start losing their house on a Monday. We want to be able to, this is about education, this is about enrichment and helping people understand what the behaviors are. So ideally, this is what the remediation should be, with the understanding that down the line, if behaviors don't improve, Orono has clear expectations for what neighborhood expectations should be. Yeah.
And I also want to say, I mean, you also got, these landlords are going to, I mean, like you say, they turn over every year. New tenants, new tenants. I think the town's got a legitimate interest to say, if you keep renting to different tenants, even if you evict them or don't, and you keep having a disorderly property there, we don't want to waive fines ever on the landlord. You continually rent to tenants that are causing problems. Something's going wrong in your process for screening tenants. And I think we've got to leave as many levers at the town level, or I don't know, or I'm misunderstanding why the process started, but we got, if we're trying to implement some sort of improvement for disorderly activity and conduct, we can't back down now that we're right here, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I
The goal.
agree with you. I think that's a general consensus around the table.
If we don't have consequences with some teeth, then there's no incentive on for either party to improve.
Yep.
You think it's appropriate to fine the landlord on the first offense?
Yeah, well, let's get into that next. So what we've done now is, we did this disorderly activity and disorderly property prohibited on 2055 on, top of page 3. We went down a bit of a tangent on, making sure we're holding the landlord harmless if they've gotten to the point where remediation, good faith discussions, good faith, good neighbor discussions aren't working with this particular set of tenants. As a landlord, I'm moving through forward with an eviction process. And that's the point where we hold the landlord harmless because we understand that the landlord is subject to the time delays of the court system, not delays, but the appropriately articulated process of the eviction process. So now we're moving into 2057, notice of disorderly activities or disorderly property. We strike the if any, whenever the police chief determines that a disorderly activity has occurred, the police chief shall notify the owner of the property as to the chief's findings according to the number and frequency of priorly disorderly activities, if any. Now, several changes in here.
Where'd you go?
We're at the bottom of page 3, 2057. The first change adds under disorderly activity 1, the police chief shall notify the owner that the activity is a violation of this article is subject to penalty as set forth in 2060. Second, disorderly activity, the property owner may attend this meeting remotely except that a repeat offense of the same owner requires an in-person meeting. And then further down in that paragraph, police chief shall further notify the owner that the activity is a violation of this article, it's subject to penalties as set forth in section 2060. I'm confused, Clint, and I guess I put it to others. Why we have different designations of disorderly activity, why we want to, what's the virtue of having different disorderly activity classifications 1 and 2? Isn't that a complication? Do we need that complication in our ordinance? Is it easier to communicate that if you conduct a disorderly activity, you can be classified as disorderly property and henceforth, and therefore this is what follows?
But right now, if you have to do 3 disorderly ones to get on the disorderly property process. Right, and the big difference is how many people you had there. If you had 20 people, you go straight to disorderly 2. Right, you have a disorderly 2, which takes you straight into the remediation process. So, I mean, I agree that there should be gradations, right? Somebody has a party with 8 people and it's just a little bit loud because they're playing whatever music loudly. That's probably not the same thing as a kegger with 100 people, most of whom they don't know, showing up at their house, right?
Yeah.
But I agree, the line, it's just very binary right now. It's like, if you had less than 20 people, you can get away with whatever you were doing 3 times. If you have more than 20 people, you can't get away with anything. Instantly, you're into this different category. So,
Yeah. I'm really struggling because I have feet in both camps on this one. I do feel we need to really send the signal that these massive house parties, particularly after 10 p.m., are something that really just never going to be a good idea in our residential neighborhoods, because they approximate like an unlicensed nightclub, unlicensed, unregulated, unsupervised, nightclub type experience that no city, no community anywhere in the world would license would happen. So I'm of different minds on it. I'd like to think that our process and our management team, our law enforcement team would be able to distinguish between, all right, Diane, you probably could have, this barbecue got a little hotter than maybe you anticipated. We don't need you, but, so I guess what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think 20 is an easy way maybe for landlords to say to their tenants, 20 people. And then they may have in their minds, okay, we can't let this really get out that we're having people come over because 20 can get out of control pretty quickly. If it's spread around, this weekend, there was a party across the street from me. And I knew it was gonna happen because at 7 o'clock, I could see people wandering the streets. So I knew that they were gonna meet somewhere. But, maybe that would be just a way of people turning people away that they don't know, or closing it down, maybe they themselves will turn down the music so people aren't just coming in. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's a good idea or not. You guys are smarter than me, but might be just an easy way for them to have in their head 20 or less, 20 or more.
Yeah.
How does it work with the frats? I think you mentioned they have to register.
They register their events, and they have a certain number of sober monitors that are per person, like of expectations of who they're coming. They also have a risk management plan for their doors and for things like that. And they can get medical amnesty if they call for help. So if they call the police for assistance, not to break it up, but just for assistance, then they'll get, some sort of, or they can get some sort of relief from that.
Any
if they're
language in
asking
here?
for help.
Is there language in here about, that registered parties are excluded or anything?
No, we didn't cross that.
Cause I was thinking, say they register, we're gonna have 30 people here and there's 60. What happens? Was there consequences or how's that happen? Like, or how do you?
I mean,
enforce it?
we would only know that if there was like a fire alarm or something like that, and nobody's gonna monitor that, we would only know that. But like, say a fire alarm was pulled or somebody that went off or something, and a number of people who piled out, but everybody's cooperative and doing the right thing, I mean, nobody's gonna count heads.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if it's a registered party that has a harm reduction or a risk management plan, and, they've done things to be cooperative and helpful and positive and things like that, there's no problems, then
I didn't know where if
be
you,
trouble.
maybe if they say, oh, we're gonna have 30 people, they kind of try to stick, 35, but they say, okay, we can only allow 30 people in here. They try themselves to monitoring and, hey, we have enough people, we can't allow 10 more people coming in here.
Yeah.
Sure, how.
I think
Still
that,
It's right. They can't be super loud and they can't be serving.
Right.
I guess to minors and things, right?
Well, I mean, we would have to kind of go down the line, I think, of having sort of a education plan, I think. Bless you.
Yeah.
If we went, that's a completely
Yeah.
different thing than an ordinance, but if we went down the line of a registration, but an education plan and, take this class and, you're a host and all those things, that's a whole different ballgame with the town than it is
Mhm.
with a university. I mean, we have a little bit more ability to say, this is an educational institution and we want you to
Right.
learn.
Because
I
if
can
you
issue,
go
I
out-
can't issue a permit for a house party. That's completely different. Those are student housing buildings that they can provide governance to.
Mhm.
I can't provide, I mean, we could, I guess. I guess we could look into it.
well, so, well, there's two things going on, and one, yeah, we could do a mass gathering. The problem with a mass gathering is it's the words mass. And the reason why it goes to that number is because the number got so high that the town's got a legitimate interest to protect the community and the public safety. And what we're getting into is that this 20 to 30. So that's where the 20, and we met on this the last time. We talked about getting rid of the other components, but leaving a threshold of under 20, over 20, so that there was a disorderly 1, disorderly 2, which if you want to change that, I neither here nor there. But we can't get to a situation where we can equitably ask a person to register a small gathering, a party, whatever you want to call it. Because what's going to happen is what happens to the extemporaneous resident that says, hey, I'm not doing anything this 4th of July. Let's have a barbecue. Everybody come over. Next thing you know, there's 24 people there. If a police officer shows up and we have an ordinance that says you have to be registered for 20 or more, and you have 24 friends at your house, we have to cite them, because if not, we're being unfair to the people that we do cite that we're trying to address. And that's where I kind of thought, let's get out of this whole registration policy and just leave a 20 under, 20 over in this one. It's not perfect, and I'm open to suggestions, but it really got into heard all the comments and I just couldn't figure out a solution to give to the attorney to say, how do we do this? Because it felt unfair no matter how we did it.
I mean, the police would be showing up because they're in violation of something, noise, or they're fighting over steak or something. I mean, very loudly.
And
It
you gotta
wouldn't just-
think if it's that 4th of July instance and say it's 24 people, that just kind of deal, no, they're just in their neighborhood and then the neighbor calls and complains because it gets a little rowdy. This policy takes place. You're over 20, you're disorderly too, you were too loud, and then the officer can look at this and say, well, you know what, first offense, we're gonna do it. It's not a tenant situation, it's an homeowner. Still a violation. You were bothering your neighbors, and that's what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, we might be overthinking this. I mean, I feel, for me anyway, I feel like the number, the 20, the 100 is just about what level of what happens next kicks in, but nothing's gonna kick in if the behavior is good. So registering a party is too big brother for me. I do not want to go there at all. But I think it's about the behavior and then the lever that we can pull based on the behavior, and crowd size does impact behavior, right? But if people have to start registering their gatherings, no.
What about ratios of tenants? Like tenants get a certain amount of guests.
So there's not, if it's registered for 4 occupants,
Yeah.
And you get-
And they get,
5 guests per occupant.
I don't know.
It does, seems more convoluted than the 20.
Yeah.
20's a little, 20 seems like, okay, it's 20, everyone
Yeah.
can register that.
I
That's
don't
just-
Talk about math.
Who's here?
I also don't see these. I think this is gonna get, I don't see people policing themselves this way, their friend shows up with a friend at their party, you're gonna say, oh no, really, we're at
Right.
capacity, that is not. I
Yeah,
don't think that's,
Agree.
so
I wouldn't have done that in Cotton.
I do love the whole harmless approach that they take at the university. I don't know, we've talked about this group continuing to meet. And if after we get through the summer and into the fall, and Gracie, are you with us today? Sorry, yeah, you are.
Yes, I am.
You know the drill, right? Let us know. Let us know if you've got something. You don't appear on screen, so I can't see if you're holding your hand up or anything. The 20, I would like to, I'd like to have some discretion, in terms of if there's a small event where people are getting, which is a gradation, is that the word you used? And I do like being able to communicate that 20 is a number that you gotta be concerned about, because it's a higher order of challenge for a host if you have 20 or more people at an event, and you just gotta be aware that that's so I don't know, is 3 too many, disorderly 1, disorderly 2? Could we leave it at the discretion what about if we wrote the ordinance so it was at the discretion, but a requirement that an event of over more than 20 that has disorderly activity ends up becoming a disorderly property? And just leave it at no particular number. So if you have a disorderly activity and there's 8 people there, but in the judgment of the police chief, it was really egregious, you move right to disorderly property. But if it's a warning and, hey, let's clean this up, it's not.
What if you just drop the 3rd? What if it was disorderly 1, second time you notify the owner and the landlord, and then at the 3rd, you're disorderly 2?
So at the occurrence of the second one or at the occurrence of the third one?
So the first one is you deal with the tenant and you're there and you're telling them, and then we notify the owner there's been a violation. The second one gets us into that written notice of a disorderly 2. And then, because I don't want, I leery of ordinances saying that the discretion can be elevated. I would just say then in the second offense, it's in the writing. We've sent the notice. This is all done the formal way. And then all subsequent events at that property will be considered a 3, will be considered a disorderly 2. So you're just dropping the 3rd activity. After 2, that's it. Smaller numbers. Hopefully less disorderly due to the smaller numbers. I mean, I know this is.
That works for me, I think.
And assuming that landlords aren't gonna necessarily know this like the back of their hand, I think when you notify them on the second, notifying them, this is the second, that's why you're being notified.
Yeah. Yeah.
Appropriate.
So what if we, again, I can't help the educational piece of me. What if we added something to after the first offense or after the second offense? We also, besides the fine, ask the tenant to take like a tips program or responsible hosting education class online or something. And provide that.
For having eight
Request?
or 9 people over.
No, not necessarily for violating the ordinance.
But-
Not for having 8 or 9 or 20 or 60.
How about, rather than a tips course, which, you know, and again, find the course, when is it, you know, all those things. What if it's just tenant, at first offense, tenant must meet with the police chief in person? And then we can educate and say, look, you get another one of these, your landlord's getting a final notice. And when you're hosting these events, I mean, if our police, you know, with that, you know, I just kind of get into the whole, can we coordinate it all?
Noticing them on the first one, aren't we? So for disorderly one, we're skipping ahead, but for disorderly one, they're getting fined.
Yeah, they're getting fined. And what if we said fined and they must meet with a police officer to talk about the problems with parties? 2. In addition to, I mean. And then at the second, I don't know, I think if you I like the educational component you're going for. I just don't like being specific of what it is, how it is, where it is, who pays for it. What if it's just as simple that the tenants must meet in person for an educational training with a police officer regarding parties? Because we could be in unique situations. I mean, obviously this is the under 20 category. And I hate to say it, but let's, you know, we're talking tenants. This isn't a property owner. So the property owner that gets cited for under 20 because they could have a disorderly isn't going to have a meeting because they're not a tenant. But the tenant would have to meet, and we could talk about the difference of where they live. I mean, if you're living in a single family home in a rural area, we could talk a little bit more honestly with them. If you're living in one of the major complexes and the complaint was from a neighbor in the complex, you know, it's different than if it was in the Webster neighborhood. And I think we got to look at this is that I'm trying to help this police department effectuate change in every part of the community that these violations could occur. So tips training for a tenant that's 38 years old living with his wife and kids isn't going to need the same sort of training as a 19-year-old living in the Ave. And I think that's why I'm trying to say, I like the education component, and let's call it that. Let's just make sure the tenant has to meet with the town, a police officer or representative to talk about why they got the violation and how to.
And we got this, you're talking about doing that after disorderly activity number 1?
That's part of one. Not only are you a first orderly and we notify the property owner that there's been a violation, but the tenant is required to have a meeting to review and learn about why the fine came in or whatever, an education component. It's gonna be tricky to word, and that's why I'd like to just kind of kick this off. But if that's what you're going for, I think this is a better way to get at it than
Well,
you know.
so then in that case, could the officer who meets with them then do something like that? Because, I mean, I'm suggesting tips because it's a national program, it's evidence-based, and it's $38 to run online, and there's 16 different classes that you could assign.
How
So I'm
about
just
meeting with the town and a tips trained representative? So that could even be, as long as we've done the tips training, we're meeting with them to explain it to. That's a good. I'm just trying to prevent making people go to this. I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. Am I overthinking it? But I just think this situation, we have an older tenant that's a renter, but they could violate this ordinance. Is that what we want them to do? I mean, if it is, it is. We can.
Your recourse when the tenant doesn't show up. Why make a rule that you're not gonna be able to enforce? How are you gonna make the tenant show up for this training?
Same way that you make a property owner show up. Right, it turns into a civil fine of $1,000 if you don't comply with the remediation process.
So again, you're gonna make the property owner responsible for the conduct.
No,
No, this would be the,
No,
this would be the
tenant.
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 I think it's good to.
But I don't see how you get that tenant to come to this training.
Well, if they get $1,000 ticket if they don't come,
Right,
How do you collect that?
if you.
you may have to go to court, I agree.
And the student is now back in Connecticut, New Jersey, something like that.
Yeah, but is that
So-
a reason not to try?
I don't care, I mean, it's a problem. I'm not denying it's a problem, but I,
Certificate to the end of it, like if you did a tips training, you give them, you have to have it turned in by July 1st or else you get a fine.
These tips, just alcohol serving thing, or is it something else?
It's alcohol.
But, I mean, there are other reasons to be a disorderly property
there
too,
are,
so
yeah.
that presupposes
Yeah,
that
so
everyone
then
in
that-
here is, like, if you had people over and blocking the street and you got a disorderly, hey, come get tips training.
It's good, just another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
As a backup, something that the officers suggest when they go talk.
Make them
To
go to,
students.
make them go to 4 school board meetings, that's enough to.
I think it's good. It's a good thing to suggest or like to.
Yeah.
You're gonna get
Use an
students who are $1,000, while my dad will pay for that, and like, they don't care.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons not to, but I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to have these things in the toolbox, I think. I do worry that we end up, if we create an expectation that anytime a disorderly activity is, what's the charge, someone is charged with it or someone is cited's a better, cited, thank you. I do worry that every time we cite something, we create an hour-long expectation for a meeting with the police department that's gonna create an incentive not to cite people. And then, no, without any, how many hours are there in a week and,
It's true.
Well, so then instead of a stick, why don't we provide a carrot and the tenant could not get a $300 fine if they took an educational class?
I see this
for incentive.
for disorderly activity one, I think I think those things are more kick in for disorderly activity two, because that does imply you had some major party, which makes tips make more sense, I think. I think there's too many variables for disorderly activity one that may have nothing to do with anything, and I don't think you have to come, if you have a small gathering, I have a cookout and it gets loud and I've got to come sit with the chief of police because I had that doesn't make any sense, I don't think. So I think any of these things we're talking about would have to be under disorderly activity.
Yeah.
Because that's a major event. Am I missing something?
I think you're right. You've had a chance to, the law has shown up, someone's complained, the police have shown up and said, this is the kind of thing we don't do, in our residential neighborhoods. You now need to be aware, and ideally will have been a process where we'll have had an education campaign, landlords will have this one pager that they are able to hand to people when they execute their leases. But all right, this is where it's starting to get real. You're getting a fine, the police have been at your door, and now if we see you again, you're another fine and your landlord's gonna get notified and there's gonna be, and you're gonna be required to do this disorderly property piece and very likely could be evicted. If that's the route the landlord wants to go, so.
From my experience, the one-time incident often happens, but if it's directly addressed, because many of these students, this is the first time they've been away, mom and dad aren't there telling them what to do, like they can get a little carried away, but if you deal with it in the first time, there's the majority of times it's not a second one.
Yeah. And let's hope that's the case,
Can I
right?
just ask a quick question? Lori, when a student gets in violation of the code of conduct, is there an education piece to that?
Yes.
So
Yeah, they
we're
go
talking
to
about
a class called
students.
basics.
So that we're talking about students in this and total residents. So if we have a good working relationship with the university and are passing along when there's one of these incidents, they would go through the code of conduct, which educates them. Takes care of the education piece. It doesn't take care of the education piece for the 38-year-old having the barbecue because they're not a student.
Like that.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so if we're working closely with the university and they already have these things in place, that's less that we have to do because it's the population and they're dealing with that population. So I think it might make sense to see if, knowing that these happen, trust that that is happening there versus with us.
If they're referred and found responsible, then they'll
Right.
go through an educational.
Okay,
I like
I
that.
like that, right?
Yeah.
And as, and again, we're partners in education, you know, with in our community, that's kind of one of the things we take on as residents of Orono, so I like that.
So
And then we'll look,
what's the university's role in, say, a party in Webster neighborhood? If that gets referred to the university, is that a code of conduct
If it
issue?
does get referred to the university, it doesn't always get referred, but if it does get referred to our community standards office, then there will be a meeting and there will be a finding of responsibility investigation if necessary. And then if there is a finding of responsibility, there'll be sanctions.
What triggers referral from the town? to
Well, the police refer regularly. They have a notice to do that, but also an email to David Fiacco, our Director of Community Standards. Could be just that can be a referral. There's usually a response back to that to say, you know, is there enough here for something? But even if there's not, even if it's just a good thing to have an educational conversation with a student to say, hey, what's going on? Do you need any assistance? That will happen.
Isn't there language in one of these that like actually says there's student housing? So they're like classified as a student house. So shouldn't those houses then just be automatically referred if they have a party? Are they registered that way?
My understanding is the student housing registration is not always enforced these days.
Right, but if it could be.
Yeah, well, I was wondering where I was headed is if we should just put it shall be referred to the university if a student is
community
involved.
standards office.
Right, notify the
applicable.
property owner, but
Yeah.
notify the university too.
It may take it more serious too, if it's coming from the university where it affect your education. Say, oh, if you get suspended or, you know, you get evicted, you could end up getting suspended.
And in most cases, it will be more likely a conversation than not, you know, than just a conversation, because if there's not evidence of
Right.
something, but it doesn't hurt to make contacts and say, what can we do to help? And how can we prevent this from happening again?
So essentially, if someone's a disorderly activity one, that comes with, is, again, looking ahead, that comes with a $300 fine. It would come with a notification to the local agent or owner, if applicable, and the community standards office, if applicable. Would that be
No.
those three?
Oh, I would, so I'm gonna jump in because I know we have more than humane students living in our community. It's a destination for anybody attending a post-secondary school.
Sure.
So I think I think the language we need to say is in the event that it's somebody that's attending a post-secondary institution in the area, that we will also contact that institution. That way, no matter which one it is, we're contacting them all. Because last thing I want to find out is this happens to be a kid that's attending blank and, oh, we can get away with murder. No one's going to report me because I'm up here in Orono now. We're going to, I don't care if you're from USM, we're going to we're going to call USM and saying, we don't know why they're commuting so far, but they're attending your school. And, you know, I think it also helps us with kids that are attending online. I happen to know that with having a college age kids myself, that there's more and more of them going to living in the college area communities, but attending online courses. Let's just say wherever they're happen to be attending.
That's why I was asking about student housing, because I wondered if they have to be registered in a certain way, because I mean, you could lie. So I just, you know, wondered if there's just a way that we know or the town knows if there's somebody there that's a student so that you can put that in place.
All right, so in terms of tasks, then for this piece here, I'm not gonna list David Fiacco's name.
Probably.
His email, so, we're gonna just say for the rewrite here, Clint, right, we're gonna, on this section, we're gonna get rid of third disorderly activity altogether. So it's gonna be 1 and 2. First disorderly activity, we're gonna include the reference to the university, a institution of high post-secondary education institution. And then with the second disorderly activity, that'll be changed so that, with the second disorderly, you move into the disorderly property designation, is that right?
You tell me. I thought after 2, the next step would be disorderly, would be level 2. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's yep, and then no piece, the post-secondary higher education kind of covers the education piece. And if yeah, so those would be the changes I think that we have a consensus about.
Yep.
And Jody's not gonna let us register parties in Orono because she probably sometimes has a lot of people over at her house.
We have ragers, I'm telling you.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, this is gonna be a reiterative process, so we're gonna learn, we're gonna get through this work. Leo, just for your benefit, because as much as it amazes me, you'll get a vote on this at the end of the process. We talked about, for edits to this section, we're gonna take out the third disorderly activity. Disorderly activity 3 is gonna go away. We're gonna strike that. And instead of having like an education piece and those kinds of things, that the town would do, we'll just, in the first disorderly activity, under the notifications, we're gonna add a institute of post-secondary education. We're not
And
gonna,
that's for disorderly one still?
disorderly 1, yep.
It still feels like it ought to be 2 to me, but, you know, I mean, again, that could be such a minor infraction.
And it may
It
just,
seems a
yeah.
little, but
The university would have discretion, they're not, I don't think the universities, I mean, some of it could be a opportunity for help or assistance rather than a slap on the hand. It could be, a reach out, like, do you need help? Are there things that you need? So I think that there's,
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to trust the institutions, humane or whatever it is, that if they had a party with 15 people and it got a little loud, right, that's just gonna be a conversation. That's not gonna be an expulsion. Right? So, but given the context we keep talking about these kids are here for the first time without parents telling them what to do. The local university is a little bit in that role, so I don't think it's a bad thing for the university to know and use their judgment to have a conversation. Right, the property owner is gonna have a different conversation about.
well, they've had a conversation with the police as well,
Right.
which probably is a little bit of an eye opener, but again.
Yeah.
1 and 2 feel quite different to me and that, again, it could just be excessive noise. Might not even be drinking and we're gonna know. Now we require the police to notify the university that has to reach out to them. It seems like it's potentially a lot versus on the disorderly 2 where, okay, you blew this up here. Now everyone's involved. I think there is a difference there and that we should probably lean towards
the activity.
the activity 2.
Well, let's look at it. Let's run it in activity 1 just for the language, and we'll come back to it next week and we'll talk again about whether we think it ought to move down to disorderly activity 2 versus disorderly activity 1. Let's see what it looks like.
Dan, are you suggesting that we wouldn't contact the universe? This language wouldn't also be in disorderly activity 2?
Oh, I think it probably should too, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Definitely on 2, and we're gonna leave it open to consensus and about whether it should be 1. And I think, Gracie, do you have any feeling about that? I mean, should we hear from more students on this too, or?
I think always having more student input could be good, but also I feel like for a situation like this, most of the student input is obviously going to be that these harsher punishments are unwanted. But I think that it's been clear throughout this committee why you guys are being very thoughtful as to what the increased punishments are and why you're instituting these ones specifically.
Yeah. I don't wanna take us, all right, I'll take us down this rabbit hole when we get to the hole. All right, the next place is remediation process. This is where we wanted to make sure that the owner has to come in person. In the event the owner is required to undertake a second plan of remediation, this meeting shall be in person. We comfortable, that's the direction we wanted to go, right? And we're comfortable with that? Any changes? Anybody okay with that? Good? Some things we take 40 minutes talking about, and some things we just kind of nod our heads and move on, right? Oh, wait.
Dan, as you
Yeah.
as you're about to enter penalties, I saw some of the communications back and forth, and I've just heard it well that tenant first. I'm open to anything on the dollar amounts. This got a little bit quirky with how to get to the right dollar amounts. You know, with the doubling components coming in there, you know, it was coincidence, but I think I shared with you and Rob Councilor Laraway, that you know, the radio I'd heard, 100 years ago, a person received $100 fine for violating a local ordinance. Today's value, that's like $2,200. So it's kind of started just putting into my head what's too much, what's not enough. And with the doubling and everything, just kind of got to the idea of a 300, then 300, 600, and then doublings from there. So disorderly ones, 300 and 300, disorderly twos, 300 and 600. It was tough, but I also understood, because a disorderly two first event and 300, 600, I know the property owner might think that's not fair. The flip side, though, is a disorderly two is also disorderly ones that graduate to being a disorderly two. So I said, you know, I think I've got to move past, and the first offense on a disorderly two should go both to the tenant and the property owner. That's also what I did in disorderly one. But if you want to switch it, I understand the idea that the first time go to tenant only in disorderly one could have some value. So I just wanted to intro it with that little bit of background, that, you know, a lot went into this and talking to the attorneys.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? When it says property owner 310 and 300 for the first disorderly one, what happens if the person holding the party is the owner of the property?
Guess it'd be six. Wow. The owner of the property is not a tenant, so they only get a $300 fine.
Okay.
Yeah, they would only get the 300. You're just the property owner. Yep.
And this will be enforced.
How would this be enforced?
That's why we are here. We're honest with ourselves. We're here because of college students. So, but there is the possibility that a privately owned home to go away
Yes,
for
we will
weekends.
have no choice but to enforce this on private homeowners. That's the fair and equitable. That's the way I'm interpreting this.
Why you might decide a Friday that weekend.
Fair is fair.
Yeah.
Our dog sitter had a party at our house. It was the loudest house, or the loudest party that some of our neighbors said. I've ever heard.
Your dog sitter did?
Our dog sitter, yeah, our dog sitter had a party at our house, and he lives down the street and had a party at his house.
Now a good time to tell Diane we're here because of.
And that is why I like the discretion, though. So say the call comes in, and I was aware of a wedding in a neighborhood last year, residential home. And they probably had 30, 40 guests show up. They were parking in the street. I think if we got a call on that, the police officer would show up and say, move your cars. And I think there would be no citation on the first. If they don't move the cars, we could call back a second time. I think we are in that spot where we do it. Or if at the first time we get called over, you know, the reception's lasting till 1 in the morning, there's loud music, there's cars in the street. You know, tenant, non-tenant, property owner, sorry, it's a disorderly property, you're disturbing the community, and here's your violation. So that's how it's currently worded. If you wanted to change it, I think it's going to get tricky, because I don't know how to discern the different ways.
Everyone's gonna be, you know, and everyone's gonna be held to the same standard.
Standards.
Had a party, she had a wedding last year, and she, you know, they had a number of party goers there, and they had cars. They went to all the neighbors and said, you know, are you okay that there's gonna be some cars in the street? Fine, there's gonna be some music. We're gonna turn it off at 10. We're all gonna go inside. That's what they did. So they had a great wedding there, and nobody called the cops. Because I mean, because we keep talking about, well, this could happen to a private, you know, citizen or somebody who's just having too many people over to a barbecue. But I think that even if I had 24 people over, I don't know that it would be huge. And if I thought it was going to be huge, I might tell my neighbors, you know. So it is a little bit different.
So I guess the concern I have with that example is we've allowed the police officers to drive through the neighborhood and make decisions. They don't know if they've talked to all the neighbors. And if a college student came to you and said, I'm gonna have a party, I'm gonna have more than 20 people, we're gonna close down at 10.
So we are saying that the police officers are going around.
Well, that's what
they're gonna
this
be-
talks about, was the ability to drive through and look around and see what's going on and make decisions.
I mean, as a police officer, would you stop that party at 9 o'clock if there were, you know, a number of people there, but they weren't being excessively loud?
Am I driving by or have I got a complaint? A lot of factors there.
Well, you can't go in anyways, can you? Is, I think.
But I'm just saying, Mitch is saying that you could now.
Let's change, I don't think I thought we were steering away from, thought we were gonna stick with the complaint-driven process. Is that, did we change language?
You said
Yes, we
Mitch-
did it 2061. Says a
2061.
police officer is authorized to issue the disorderly activity notice at the scene of an event defined in 2053. That's
There's
what we
a,
left the last meetings with.
yeah, but does the police officer get out of their car based on their own observation?
2053, blocking or obstructing any town road by people or vehicle,
Yeah, okay.
excessively loud noise.
I thought you had said that that would all be based on a complaint, not on personal observation.
Why don't you change it in 2061?
Well, 2061 doesn't say personal observation. What happens
Yeah.
is in the definitions, we say that if an officer, you know, that
I think this is why I've always gotten scared, not scared, concerned with sending inconsistent messages to an ordinance where we don't know what's going on in every single person's home. I don't know if I don't know if it's a wedding. I don't know if it's a party. I don't know if, you'd be shocked how many noise complaints we get when the NHL is having a finals game, NBA finals. Any type of, the Red Sox win the World Series and everybody loses their mind. You could have 10 disorderly events in town because the Red Sox won the World Series in 2009, right? So I think if the group wants to go the way of personal observations, we just need to be careful about what that means for the whole community, because I don't know what's going on. I just know I'm driving by and there's 15 cars on the road and it's coming from this house and it's 9 or 10 o'clock. And the ordinance says that we can notice a violation of that. That's the black and white answer.
Maybe the way to go is to continue with the process of it being complaint driven. We gotta get everyone, gotta get the 866 4000 tattooed on Diane's arm, so she knows when to call it. Tell all her friends, and then, a year from now, because we're gonna meet a year from now, because we're gonna continue to have these conversations, if we're finding that we just can't get over that hump and we need to revisit how the police proactively address, then we have a discussion about perhaps that policy change. But maybe it's too much to bite off to do both at the same. And I want to make sure that our police officers are comfortable and have a clear policy in place. And I don't know if we have enough.
I think the changes, if you asked if the changes to 2053, I don't think are gonna change what we observe. If we go back to those, right, the observable things that say what's a disorderly property. If we get a complaint and we see these things like Clint and I have talked about, cars blocking, excessively loud, that's universally understood. It's different if we say that we want to go proactive versus reactive. Because proactive is, I'm driving through the neighborhood on the 4th of July, like Clint said, and you have 8 cars in the Sailor development, that's a disorderly property fundamentally by the ordinance. And it doesn't matter who's doing it. If you want us to do it for one, we gotta do it for all. Fundamentally, that's what we're saying.
So why don't we just add, if we add to the legislative findings in section 2051, that the town council hereby finds that, and they bullet out some things, why don't we just add a bullet right there that this is a complaint-driven ordinance? Because I like the fact, because what I saw was we've gone back and forth here. We don't want complaint-driven, we do want complaint-driven. I think it's time we decide we're going complaint-driven and put it in ordinance. And then that's fair to the staff and fair to the residents to know that that's where we're coming from. We're not out there looking for you, but if we get a complaint, we're going to come checking. If that's not working, then we'd have to change the ordinance and saying we don't want to be complaint driven anymore. And we would correct that language.
Can I ask one question of you, which is, so I like that, and I think that that's for me, that feels like a comfortable place to start. I don't know about everybody else, but my question would be, say you or your officers are driving around and it's 9, 10 at night, and you see a lot going on somewhere that you can hear and see as you're driving. Can you only respond to that if there's a complaint? Like, that's what I'm not sure.
that's what we would do. That would be consistent with what we've done now and what we've always done, is that our instances of noise
Yeah.
are complaint driven.
Okay.
Proactive things would be the traffic enforcement, the other types of things. We don't typically proactively go after noise violations.
But if the street.
Because
Dan.
I don't know what the neighborhood dynamic's like. I don't know who's home, not. If it's actually bothering somebody, that's where I typically say
But
complaint
would you,
driven.
but like if there was a bunch of cars and the
Yeah.
road was too tight to get through, then you would
We-
typically address that.
We've gone and talked to people. I can say that we've gone and talked to people before. If it's like a narrower road down in the basin or Sailor Development or even, Webster side. If the road's getting clogged, we would try and say, hey, if a fire truck had to get down here or an ambulance or something like that, we would try and get it cleared up as best we can.
And presumably if you see behavior like on the side, you know.
Yeah, if something comes to us, then we can say, hey, I'm also seeing
And
this
remember,
one.
and remember, the only thing we're precluding ourselves from is you can investigate anything you want as an officer with probable cause. What this ordinance would say is we can't issue a $300 or $600 fine if we hadn't first received the complaint. That's what's going to change. So if you're seeing a bunch of cars, bunch of noise, you look around, all of a sudden you see somebody's in the commission of a felony. Well, it's not like, oh, well, I don't have the complaint first. Of course, you're going to arrest them. There's a crime being committed. You saw it and you arrested them. So I think that's to help understand. We're just saying that the ordinance would not allow for you to issue this fine because you didn't have the initial complaint.
Okay, let's,
Yeah.
let's take,
Going back to 2053, right now, section A, it's any one of these activities can get you into the disorderly activity. Right, and it's a little bit reduplicative with the noise ordinance, for example, and Leo said, I play my stereo loud, I really want to get into disorderly activity, disorderly property. I wonder if you need to have at least two of these events to trigger a disorderly activity. Right, loud noise and a large gathering, loud noise and serving minors, loud noise and parking violations. Right, or serving minors and parking. I wonder if this ordinance was written to be very inclusive, and then it's been based on trusting officer judgment, which is, mostly worked in this. But, if you're trying to write the law to not put that burden on the officers, I wonder if just, you have to have a couple of these activities before it becomes disorderly.
I think that makes sense. And then I just looking at this again, excessive loud, unnecessary, deemed unacceptable by officer of the property line. I think maybe that, based on what we just talked about, shouldn't be in there either. But I think that might be a good, and I don't think, assuming that doesn't negate including but not limited to, that doesn't mean there could be other things, but I mean, I think that's a good, like, again, because you're playing your music.
Somebody has a jackhammer.
You gotta get a
11
police
o'clock at night.
letter and everything else. I think that's, I can't, is there any reason not to have it be like two of those? I can't think of one.
I don't know, if someone's got,
We're all over the map here.
yeah. Let's keep it how it is and let's go, if people are okay, let's keep it how it is and come back. We're gonna get another bite at this whole thing next week. And we got quick, we gotta move fairly fast. So under 2051, we're gonna, under legislative finding complaint, it sounded like we had consensus on adding complaint-driven ordinance under the findings, and we'll work as a, on that. And we'll educate people on that. So in terms of the rewrite here at 10:10 a.m. We'll include that, and then we gotta move ahead to the fine structure. And just for people's, we got 19 minutes left today. We gotta come back with, we've notified the council that we're gonna plan in our July 14th, we have two more meetings for this group. So at our next meeting, we have to come out of that meeting with, I think, pretty good consensus on what the ordinance is gonna look like that we're gonna bring to the town council for a public hearing. So we're gonna at our July 14th meeting, we're gonna ask the council will consider, I always need to couch these things. The council, on our agenda, the council will have an opportunity to consider calling a public hearing based on the amendments we're making to this ordinance. And that would put, I think, 2 weeks out, a public hearing on the ordinance, and then 2 weeks after that, the council could conceivably act on the ordinance and make it law, like it law, the law of Orono to the extent that it is. So we're gonna wanna come in, we're gonna wanna finish our first walkthrough today, charge staff in the attorney's office to make any additional changes so that we come back on the 8th, which is a week from today, or the 7th, whatever our next is, 7th, with something we'll go through really closely, and that'll go to the council, and we want to come out of that meeting with ideally a recommendation from this committee that the council move forward with this ordinance. Does that make sense to people? Good. All right, so now, under the penalties, we got disorderly activity one's a $300 fine for the property owner and the tenant. Anybody? We're gonna keep that? We okay with that number? Okay.
I mean,
Just put me on the record as I think it's unreasonable to fine on the first offense.
Okay,
I personally don't have a problem with the notion that if it's a, activity one, how's the landlord supposed to know whether the tenant's gonna play their stereo too loud or not? I don't have a problem with the first disorderly activity just going to the tenant.
the occupant, or tenant or occupant, if
Yeah.
it's a.
Yeah.
Well, and I think back to the definitions, and I know you want to skip over that, Dan, but I'm not gonna let you.
So we're gonna keep Leo and I both.
No, but it was Brian's point. I think having having two events in there helps with that as well. I mean, but I'm not opposed to just having it be the owner, just having it be the tenant.
All right, let's go around on the definition piece then, since let's get past it by asking everybody. Do we want to have it be 2 activities to be a disorderly activity? To be a finable offense, or are we okay with it being remaining 1? So I got kind of two votes for
Two.
2. What does everybody else think? 2, show of 2s.
I'm on the 2 side.
All right, well, so am I then, so let's change that.
Dan?
No, instead of fighting with Leo, sometimes I just gotta ask everybody, sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. I win more than I lose, but that's fine, let's do that.
Tracking.
Once in a while, I'm in the majority, dude. Once in a great
Well,
while.
I end up being, whoops, I guess I'm on the wrong, I'm just some guy walking, like a leader, it can be sometimes just some guy walking around, or a person walking around if no one's following. So I don't wanna be that. All right, so it's gonna be 2 of these things. You got that, Clint? Are you?
Yep.
Keep it. All right, now the fines. I feel like, let's do this one quick. I feel like Dennis doesn't know what's going on. And this is gonna be the first time he hears about it. Should Dennis get a $300 fine? Feels like no. Okay.
Yep.
So we're gonna strike the property owner, the property owner, but we're gonna make it occupant, tenant, or occupant. So if it's Dennis's house, if we're at Forest Avenue and we're hearing the music, we know where Dennis lives, right? Out there past the circle. We're coming, he's getting the
I'll
fine.
tell you what, it won't be after 10. I'm gone.
Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna make it clear it's the occupant, so it's not just tenants.
Just to, because I can't trace back here, but does that, on that disorderly, first time tenant gets it, is the owner getting notified?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, so then if it happens at one of Dennis's rentals, he'll be notified but not fined. If it happens at Dennis's house, he'll be fined.
So I have a question about 2, which we're moving to.
Yep, let's move to number 2.
So because the property owner wasn't fined on the first one, should we flip those numbers here? The tenant gets 6 and the property owner gets 3, because if they didn't know the first time,
Right.
why would we slap them with twice the fine? But the tenant knew, so how do you feel about that?
I kind of feel like since there was no fine for the property owner, but they've been notified, it creates more urgency to kind of get after it right away.
Okay.
If it's a $600 fine, so 0 out of the gate, but you double up on the second one because.
Timing's everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
Timing's
Okay.
everything.
All right,
I
that's
get
fair.
it, but we
If I
can't.
get a notice on Wednesday and then then on Friday, they have their second party.
Yeah, well, we can't control that.
Yeah, we can't, there's some minutia here that we're not gonna be able to legislate, but.
Okay, all right.
I do think the tenant should have a step up, right? If they're on a second notice, they got 300 the first time, they should get 600 the next time.
So 600 across the board?
Well, it looks like that was purposely done, Clint. I don't know if you have any.
It was not purposely done. It was just premised on the way we had set it up. If you're gonna go that route, I don't know, at a minimum, I think they should be at least equal maybe on that second offense.
Yeah, so what do we do is, let's vote, right? So we don't wonder whether I'm right or wrong. So, 600 for the property owner, 600 for the tenant on the second one. And then keep the doubling after 10 PM before 8 AM. I like that.
Yep.
Okay,
600 each.
each, if
Yep.
it's 9 PM,
Yep,
1 PM, it's 1,200 each
yep.
Second offense.
per second. Yeah,
Yeah, we're serious.
yeah, it's gotta
Stop having-
communicate it. This is, after 10 PM.
Right, these are meant to be deterrents, not ka-chings
We're gonna-
fundamentally,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
But my understanding from previous discussion, if the landlord is entered into, say, eviction,
You're old,
They won't have to pay the
you're out of
1,200.
fine free card, yeah, you're in that point of the process, yeah. And we need to be clear, we'll have to make that clear in the ordinance, and I've got it in my notes, add a clause, eviction, hold harmless. So,
Just. Someone plays a disorderly one, I don't see a landlord moving into it. And probably we're doing a bill of rights on the other side of this thing. That you probably, at this stage, are not gonna be an eviction process with a tenant because of the disorderly property one that you just got the notice on, right?
Mhm.
So that's not likely.
So we're saying too that there's no mulligans for disorderly two. Like if we just write a straight disorderly two, you're going straight to fines.
yep, no
Okay.
breakfast balls, no mulligans, no whatever sports metaphor.
But you get two disorderly activities before you're even a disorderly one.
Or you could be a disorderly two automatically.
If you're 20 or more and it gets out of hand,
Right.
okay,
That's why I'm saying it's or. We're talking disorderly ones going to twos, but if you're just a two, you're going straight to fines for everybody.
yeah, the odds of my starting an eviction on the first one would be incredibly rare, because like I said, the
Yeah.
majority of them, when I've dealt with the first one, they don't have a second one.
Yeah.
you do get a second one, you get a $600 fine. I
We talked
imagine
about that can go into a contract that's passed on to the
the
tenant,
deposit,
right?
you lose your security deposit to pay that or whatever.
Assume I know we're rushing, we're gonna get this thing done, it's gonna be done in August or whatever, but leases are signed, so there's no way of putting that into a current lease.
No, but I mean, when we get into the piece about an educational campaign, those kinds of poster campaigns are very effective for students when they're aware of like fines and consequences and things like that. It's very effective to be aware of that,
Right, but for a landlord, they're not,
right?
and because I think it's important that we get this information, because I've got it in my lease that, I can't remember what the fee is, but that I'm passing it on, but now it's if it's instead of $300, it's $1,200. It's not in my lease to pass it on, and the leases are signed, so.
I'd be willing to consider a delay in the effective date
Mm.
of some amount of time for the fine, the property owner fines, if that's gonna be palatable.
Really, it's a moot point. I
Yeah.
haven't had to deal with this yet.
Yeah.
so.
Ideally.
To be knocking on something.
What's that?
All right, so a disorderly, subsequent disorderly activity, the occurrence is, disorderly activity in the same premises more than once within 360 days is considered a subsequent disorder, okay? Is this okay? We're all right with that?
But the doubling thing, I do think, again, that someone getting evicted can run up a landlord, they're already disqualified because they're getting evicted.
Yeah, they'll be okay.
Just so I understand, so you're saying if you have Hockey House has a huge party and somebody calls at 11 o'clock at night, that gonna be, police officer shows up and agrees that it's very loud and everything else. Is that gonna be property owner 1,200 and tenant
Yeah,
on the first?
On the first one.
if you're having a rage, or whatever the right term is.
People need to be educated.
What's the term? What would the term be?
Varies.
Yeah.
Going on records with saying
That's the
that.
second one.
Yeah,
Second one.
but it's.
It's not if it's a 20 or more, if it's a,
20 or more people,
yeah,
there's no warning.
right. We're gonna have to warn people.
Yeah.
So that time.
People really
The
need to-
education has to be a piece of it.
And we've got a community policing officer, we've got a code enforcement, we have code enforcement officer. And we've got partners at the university, we've got all this work we're gonna have to do to educate people that these are the things. And I mean, I could say we're gonna have a public hearing and I get it, like, I know how many people come to our meetings, so I don't expect that to be the education piece, but, we've gotta get the word out and.
Well,
I think we all worry about, oh, what if I have that barbecue with 24 people? Everybody's gonna call on me. I mean, I think part of the problem is people don't call. I mean, at least in our neighborhood, people don't really call that much, I didn't think. And so, we're worried about, making everything toned down because of that, but then at the same time, I'm a little bit like, oh gosh, now I'm a little worried about calling on a kegger because I guess.
That's on you as a citizen, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
no,
we've done our job as a community to be responsive to the
Yes.
concerns we heard, whether you take us up on it or not, it's kind of you. And then,
Yeah,
nobody wants anybody to be in a violent situation like
Sure.
that,
right,
but.
yeah.
So in the 360-day window of the second, the property changes ownership, what happens?
Student moves out, another student moves in, different student.
No, I'm talking ownership,
Oh, okay.
not tenants, because tenants will probably happen in this case.
Yeah, I think it sticks with the property, don't you think? I mean, we don't want to live.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you can, I mean, that's why. If you get your fine big enough, it's pretty easy to change the ownership. You can go from one LLC to another pretty easy.
Well, then, we're gonna start playing hardball, people who try that in different ways, I think.
I think you can keep it with the property, just like you would anything else.
That's what I
like
wondered, I
taxes or
wondered
levies,
if
same
somebody
with
would play
property.
that game with it.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
It would be, it would be that, and when.
So if I buy Dennis's dilapidated party central house,
Which one?
Is that the one on Fourth Avenue?
it's past the circle. And he's had property violations. I inherit those. I'm at stage 3 when I buy it. That doesn't make sense.
Why doesn't it make sense?
Well, because I'm a new owner and I just bought this property and probably
No.
may or may not have gotten the tenants and I'm buying it to clean it up because he's not taking care of it.
That would all explode.
The circumstances, you negotiate that into the price.
And presumably you would know that going in. That's not going to be secret. That's going to be known going in.
I mean, we get phone calls all the time, people researching everything about every property they buy. Are there code violations? Do they owe taxes? Are there any liens? Are there any of that stuff? All that stuff would be part of the purchase process for somebody buying a house.
I was thinking more of an owner just playing a game with you from moving it from one
Right.
LLC to another
Yep.
LLC.
I don't disagree
Which
with
would be
that.
very easy to
I
do.
think that's why you would do it.
Yeah.
Is it's there.
Okay. All right, under this next section, disorderly property.
Do you need fines for disorderly properties if you're already doubling every time there's a?
Yeah, I don't know that we need any disorderly property fines. Do you, Clint, if we have all these fines in place for the activity? Other than it is the fines to get people who don't show up for a meeting? Well,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, let me read into that. So no fines for disorder, remove the property in that section is what you're saying?
yeah, since we're hitting the activity, why, just because it gets labeled, doesn't feel like it's,
Feels redundant.
yeah, it feels redundant.
Yeah, at that point, disorderly property is about a process of remediation, right?
Right.
Which is
It's not,
separate from finding each activity that's a problem.
I think that makes sense. All right, we got 5 minutes left. Tracy, you have anything for us before we get to the last piece?
Nope.
Okay. The last piece with the edit was under 2061 enforcement. It reads instead of the police chief, a police officer is authorized to issue the disorderly activity notice and fine at the scene of an event defined in section 2053. And we wanted that because we wanted the officer to be able to issue the citation at the event itself, like in real time, not have to come in the next day, 2 days from now on the next business day. That makes sense to me. Anybody have any concerns with that? Chief, you okay with your officers being able to make that citation?
I would say as long as we're not doubling back on ourselves from what we just talked about 20 minutes ago, where this isn't proactive driven. We put some clause in the beginning where it says this is reactive driven, if that's what the group wants,
Yep,
if that's what the group wants.
yep. So a police officer authorized to issue the sort of activity notice.
I think you can leave it this way. I think if you're just gonna put that clause in the beginning of the ordinance, like we said,
Yeah.
where this is a complaint driven ordinance process.
Yeah,
I think the spirit of putting this letter A in 2061 was for us to go out and be able to be more proactive. But if we're concerned about what the backside effect of that might be, is I think we just need to put in a
yep.
a directionary point in the ordinance somewhere else that says this is the why.
Okay, and there's complaint driven. And again, that's
I'm gonna
something,
prefer it to be complaint driven.
Yeah.
It should be complaint driven.
yeah. Okay, and then it's a further violations article for any owner to refuse to meet. Do we need a fine in this piece?
It's in D, just above,
It's in what, D?
just above 2061, section D.
Yeah, civil penalty piece. Okay. I think this was good work. Anybody have anything else? So we're gonna clean this up, bring it back for the meeting on the 7th. With the hope that we'll come out of this with a recommendation for the council on this particular piece. We owe you a lot more on the education and communication stuff. That I know that I hope to be able to work on some. I'm gonna be out of town for the next several days, but I'll be able to work on that while I'm away.
That page that the landlords are gonna give to their tenants
Mhm.
is really important for them to understand, you have to cut this is what's gonna happen
Mhm.
if anybody calls.
And if it goes past 10 o'clock,
Yeah.
this is even more gonna happen. Yeah.
And more broadly, I think it's important that just everyone that's,
Oh.
who has a stake in Orono understands this, so it's gonna take a bit. Now, if this is complaint driven, we have to understand not just that that's on us as abutters, but also the consequences, so to really assess what it is that we're seeing and hearing and
Yeah.
make non-reactive, like mindful choices about what we're doing.
Thank you. I'm gonna open a quick can of worms. I know we only have seconds left for me to do this, but what happens? Does this apply to the big three complexes, just like, I mean, you have two disorderly activities at a big three complex and all of a sudden we're hauling that land, that, it's 400, whatever number of units are there? What's that?
$2,400 for a second notice in there.
Do we want to combine this to like the mixed, the medium density residential zone, so by zone, I mean, that's a commercial zone, so it's different. Do we want to exclude that just for, I mean, just the size of it? And every time you're up there with a disorderly activity.
Since I'm sitting in Matt's seat, I'm gonna say, no, if you're gonna do it to us, you do it to them.
So I would say from where my property is located, the most noise we often get is coming from those
Okay, all right.
over what used to be green space. So,
Orchard Trails is right behind you, isn't it?
I think you have a legitimate concern about how that all goes down when
Right.
you've got 200 kids and however many units and who's associated with what. Lots of luck figuring that out, I guess, when it comes right down to it, but.
good point.
But that's,
They can't have parties in the residential neighborhoods, you might have more people going over there.
Well, there would be a situation, I mean, there's a lot of nuances to this, but no, I don't think you should exempt them. You just shouldn't.
okay. All right,
And they do swarm.
Property is an apartment unit, right? So, just because unit 100 has a disorderly activity one, and then unit 300 has
oh, I get it.
it doesn't necessarily mean the whole property.
So it
is
doesn't
now.
mean the whole, okay, I was thinking of property.
There's,
The whole
there's
But
250
if I get a
kids.
6-unit building, I have a problem with one apartment, is that exempt the rest of the building?
Yeah, no.
So now I don't know if.
Yeah, wait a minute, I think you're wrong.
Yeah, I don't know.
Next week work.
You know what, something to think about for next week. I thought we did really good work today, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, great.